Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly away from shore, not from your soft pillow, but from a midnight lagoon somewhere deep in the Pacific. The kind of place where the stars come out like old friends and the horizon vanishes into ink. The ocean is black, still, and endless. You're barefoot on braided deck mats, ducking under a low boom of a crab-claw sail. Your canoe is lashed with rope made from coconut fiber, stitched by hand, and creaking like a living creature about to breathe. You bring no compass, no sextant, no map. Just memory, chants, and stars overhead that refuse to lie. You probably wouldn't survive this. The truth is, the open Pacific doesn't care who you are. It doesn't offer guardrails or second chances. A single mistake could leave you drifting for weeks, or worse, drifting forever. And yet your ancestors mastered it. They crisscrossed this ocean long before steel ships and satellites. And tonight, it's your turn. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time your clock whispered bedtime. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your canoe begins to drift away from shore, slowly, gracefully. You don't shout, you don't cheer, you just go. The moon's hanging low, half veiled by wisps of cloud. Your crew is quiet. Each man and woman on board has a role, a rhythm. You've practiced this moment since childhood. You adjust the ropes without speaking. You glance at the stars without straining. Your hands know the canoe better than your own reflection. Midnight departures are more than tradition, they're tactical. Historians still argue whether ancient voyagers deliberately timed their exits to align with nocturnal land breezes, or whether it was just an elegant coincidence. But either way, you're using the wind that slides seaward when the island cools. It pushes you gently past the reef's outer ring, beyond the noisy rustle of palm trees and out into deep water. You don't look back. Not yet. Your canoe rocks slightly. You feel it shift under your weight. The twin hulls float with quiet confidence, buoyant but balanced. This double-hulled craft is your lifeline, your sanctuary, your tool of defiance. With it, you're about to cross 1,000 leagues of open ocean. Below deck, gourds of water, bundles of dried breadfruit, salted fish, taro corms, and a few annoyed chickens pacing back and forth between the lashings. One of them squawks, but no one laughs. You're still in the threshold, the liminal space between island and unknown. You duck your head beneath the boom and glance upward. Only a few stars are out, but that's enough. Altair, Vega, a part of Scorpius curling over the eastern horizon. Soon, they'll all be visible. But you already know where they're going. You've chanted their names 100 times. You've watched them rise and fall for years, tracking their slow migration across the sky like distant relatives who never forget to show up on time. Someone mutters a chant under their breath, not for show, for calibration. It helps them steer. Some believe early navigators counted chants between paddle strokes to estimate time and distance. Others say they used their heartbeats or the sway of the canoe itself. Historians still debate whether these chants were standardized or personalized. But out here, rhythm is measurement. Your teacher, your Palu, once told you that the moment you can no longer see your island is the moment your spirit must stay sharp. Because now, you are only guided by things that move. Stars, wind, swells. No fixed landmarks, just shifting clues, stitched together into patterns that only the trained mind can follow. You glance back. The island is gone. Just a shadow now. A memory. Good. That's how it's supposed to be. Your sail flutters slightly as the wind changes. Not much, but enough for you to adjust the tension. You feel the difference through your feet, more than your hands. The canoe hums differently when it's trimmed right. You smile. You're listening to a symphony no one else hears. Your crewmate points to the northeast. A flash of silver, a flying fish. It skims across the waves, arc up, then vanishes. You nod. The fish is a sign. It means the sea is calm, the temperature's right, the ocean is alive. Little signs like this pile up. Together they paint your path. You chew on a sliver of dried banana. You're not hungry. You're grounding yourself. Something about the motion of chewing, the sweetness of it, the memory of land, it keeps your stomach from rebelling. And believe me, seasickness is the enemy out here. There's no horizon to stare at, no motion pill tucked in your pack, just salt and sway and pride. Overhead, more stars appear. You spot the Pleiades, or Makalea in Hawaiian. They shimmer in tight formation, small but bright. In some islands, their rising marks the beginning of the voyaging season. They call travelers home or send them off again. Their presence means the sky is clear. That's your signal to trust what you know. And what do you know? That Arcturus, Hokulea, will reach zenith at the latitude of Hawaii. That the Southern Cross will tilt and fall lower the farther north you go. That Vega rises before Cassiopeia. That birds leave land in the morning and return to it at night. That clouds can reflect the turquoise glow of a hidden lagoon. That if you ever doubt yourself, you stop and you feel, not think, feel. Feel the way the canoe pitches when a swell hits the bow versus the stern. Feel how the air cools near a landmass. Feel how the rhythm of paddling changes as the wind shifts behind your shoulders. And you know one more thing. This is not the first time you've done this. Not just in this life, but in every life carried inside your bones. You're not just sailing forward, you're sailing backward too. Retracing the steps of ancestors who looked up, not down when the world grew uncertain. Your crew settles into silence. One is half asleep with a foot still nudging the tiller. Another is humming something that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. And you? You lie back, eyes open, watching Orion's belt slide from the right side of the mast to the left, a cosmic metronome ticking off your progress in degrees and heartbeats. You don't need a map. You've become one. Somewhere ahead lies an island, a speck of green in an ocean of blue. Somewhere behind, your people wait. And right here in the middle of everything, you are still moving. The canoe breathes. Not literally, of course, but after a while, it feels that way. You begin to notice it, the way the hulls flex just slightly with each long swell, like ribs expanding and contracting. The soft creak of rope as the tension shifts. The way the platform beneath you pulses with a rhythm older than your language. And you lie there, chest rising and falling in time with it, part of something living, something larger than you. You're no longer on the canoe. You are the canoe. Out here, in the velvet dark of the Pacific, that matters. Because you've left behind land. You've left behind all reference points. No landmarks, no towers, no comforting clock ticking on a wall. Just water in every direction. Stars overhead. And your floating cathedral of lashed wood and hope. And if you don't become part of it, if you treat it like a boat and not a body, you won't last long. Your fingers trail lightly along the edge of the deck platform. It's rough in spots, smooth in others. You remember helping build it, stripping bark, smoothing poles, lashing beams with cynic cords soaked in coconut oil. Every knot you tied with intent. Your teacher once told you, every cord is a choice. You didn't understand it at the time, but now each knot holds your life. The twin hulls float parallel, shaped from enormous logs once dragged from distant valleys. In Hawaii, they'd be koa. In Aotearoa, kauri. Elsewhere, breadfruit or ironwood. The builders picked trees not just for their strength, but for their story. Some believe you ask permission from the tree before cutting it, that it must agree to carry people across the ocean. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic or part of genuine religious ritual. But for you, it's always been both. You run your fingers across the lashing points between the hulls, the iako. These are the bones that hold everything together. cross beams that have weathered months at sea. One wrong lashing, one weak knot, and the whole thing shears apart in a storm. But not tonight. Tonight, the canoe flexes and breathes and rides like it was born for this. Above you, the sail catches a puff of wind and shifts. The boom arcs with a groan. Your eyes dart to it. You tighten the line without thinking. Not because you're afraid, but because you're attuned. It's like adjusting a blanket in your sleep. You just know something needs nudging. The air smells of salt and sun-baked rope. There's a hint of fish, too. Maybe from a line trailing behind the canoe. You're hoping to snag a mahi-mahi or skipjack, something fresh. The dried food is good enough, but nothing beats the thrill of hauling up a silver body from the deep and hearing the crew murmur thanks as it lands on the deck. You stand now, carefully, toes curled for balance. The canoe sways beneath you, but doesn't tip. You move with it, knees soft, hips loose. One crewmate nods, another hands you a carved paddle, not to steer, just to feel, to touch the water and listen. You dip the blade in, slow and easy. And just like that, you know. The swells are coming from two directions now, one long and low from the northeast, another sharper, choppier from the south. They're starting to mix, intersect, cross-hatch beneath your canoe like woven mats. And the canoe responds. She doesn't resist, she dances. Gliding forward, then yawing slightly, adjusting herself with each collision of waves. This is your first true test of awareness. The ocean doesn't scream her warnings, she whispers them. If you don't feel that second swell, you miss the cue, and if you miss the cue, you veer off course. 10 degrees today becomes 50 by morning, and suddenly that island you're aiming for? Gone, missed by hundreds of miles. Somewhere in the tangle of swell and spray, your mind begins mapping the currents. The pitch of the canoe tells you one thing, the spray off the bow tells you another. You glance at the stars, not to find direction, but to confirm it. Altair is still where it should be. So is the South Cross. Good. That means your reading of the swells is solid. The canoe agrees. And tonight, that's enough. You remember Epilogue, legend of Micronesian wayfinding, saying he could lie in the hull and feel 4 different swell patterns at once. He didn't need the stars. He felt the sea. He felt it in his bones. Some say he even used his testicles. Yeah, you heard right. To sense the subtlest vibrations. And before you laugh, know this. When your body becomes your compass, you use every nerve it gives you. The canoe creaks again. A soft morning. The lashings are holding, but you check them anyway. Routine. Respect. There's a superstition. If you ignore a creak, it's bad luck. Might not be scientific, but you're not here to argue. You're here to arrive. Someone adjusts the sail. The boom swings again. You duck without thinking. No need to shout. Everyone's moving with the canoe, not against her. Your team flows like water itself. You step back toward the storage area between the hulls. This is where your food lives, and your tools. A few sharp shells for cutting, bundled taro, tied baskets of coconut meat, water gourds, carefully sealed with wax and tucked to the center for balance. Your navigator, the Tuhunga, once said, if your supplies shift, your destiny might too. And that's not metaphor. Weight affects everything. Trem, balance, direction. If the canoe favors one side, it leans into the wind wrong. You compensate without even realizing it until you're suddenly sailing southeast instead of east. You pull back the woven lid of a supply basket and check the water levels. Still full. The gourds haven't leaked. Good. Rain hasn't come yet, and you might need every drop. You look up. The sky's still clear. A few scattered clouds, soft-edged and harmless. You whisper thanks. Back on deck, someone hums a tune. It's slow, rhythmic, a voyaging chant passed down generations. Not just a song, an instruction. Each verse carries directions, star paths, island names, what to do if a reef appears from nowhere, where to find fresh water in a barren landfall. These chants are maps in disguise. Historians sometimes debate whether these chants changed over time, whether they drifted like dialects do, or whether they were preserved perfectly, word for word. Maybe both are true. But tonight, that chant connects you not to history books, but to the hands that wove these sails, to the voices that once warned of rogue waves, to the lives that made this life possible. You lie back down, the sail flaps softly, the canoe breathes again, and this time, you exhale with her. The canoe glides, but beneath it, something deeper moves, an invisible road laid across the sea. You can't see it, but you can feel it. A slow, rolling rhythm that lifts the hull, dips it, then steadies again. It's like being rocked by the breath of a sleeping giant. Welcome to your real compass, the swell. You dip your hand into the water, fingers trailing behind like a sea creature testing the current. There's more than one pattern here. At first it felt simple, a single push maybe from the northeast, but now something shifted. A second swell has joined the party, and it's cutting across the first at an angle. The result? A crisscross undercurrent your body has to decipher. This isn't guesswork. This is training. Years of feeling, logging, memorizing. Your hips remember more than your mind. When a swell comes from the east, the canoe lifts one way. From the south, it lifts another. You know the difference. You don't even have to think about it. You just know. This is what your Palu called the Swell Compass. It's not a metaphor. It's an actual system used to navigate when the stars hide and clouds roll in. The swells move in straight lines across the sea, like ghost highways stretching thousands of miles. And they're born from storms you'll never see, tempests brewing over distant continents. Their energy travels long after the clouds are gone, long after the rain has dried. What you feel now is the memory of that storm, a message delivered through water. Epilogue could reportedly read 5 swell systems at once. 5. Most of us struggle with 2, but he'd lie flat in the canoe, close his eyes, and just listen with his body. He could tell when one swell overtook another. He could even recognize specific island chains by how the swells changed around them. Historians still argue whether this kind of perception was innate or trained, but Mao insisted it could be taught with enough time, pain, and ocean. Tonight, you're feeling 2 swells, one long and slow, pulsing from the northeast. That's your primary. It's been consistent since departure. But now, a second swell joins from the south, shorter and choppier. It's not aggressive yet, just insistent. You shift your weight, adjusting the canoe's angle to ride both without being thrown off course. Your crew sees you move and mirrors you. No words needed. You think of the Carolinian stick charts, those strange spiderweb maps of coconut ribs and cowrie shells. Westerners used to dismiss them as primitive art. Now they're recognized as one of the most sophisticated mnemonic tools ever made. Straight sticks for dominant swells, curved sticks for how waves bend around islands, shells for landfalls. But you don't carry one with you. You carry its meaning. The pattern lives in your mind now. There's a term the Marshallese used, rilab, the backbone swell. It's the dominant one, reliable, strong. Tonight, that's the northeast swell. The southerly one might be a boondockerek, strong seasonal and sometimes spiteful. You're hoping it fades by morning. You brace as the canoe starts to corkscrew, not wildly, just a subtle twist. Stern lifts first, then port side, then bow. That's what happens when swells hit at a diagonal. It's called yawing, and if you're not ready for it, it'll sneak up and throw your navigation off.
But you're not caught. You ride it, flow with it. You even smile. Because once you recognize the twist, you can use it. You can chart it. Someone asks quietly, "Still on course?" You nod. Then, just to be sure, you check the sky. Altair is right where it should be, gliding west, hand in hand with Deneb. The swell matches the stars. Harmony. That's the goal. Not domination, not conquest. Harmony. You kneel and put your ear to the deck. Yes, really. You're listening, not to sound, but to vibration. The whole talks. When swells conflict, they argue. When they agree, the canoe rides like a drumbeat. Right now, you hear a slow, steady thrum. Good. That means you're balanced between them. You're dancing, not dragging. It's funny, some people assume this kind of navigation is about eyes, but really it's about the body, your ears, your skin, the way your back tightens when a wave shifts direction. You remember once being told, you don't steer the canoe, you become the canoe. And now you know what that means. There's a breeze tonight, steady and warm. You use it, yes, but you trust the swells more. The wind can lie. It changes. It teases. But the swell remembers. It holds its course for days, even weeks. When everything else is lost, when the sun's too bright, the clouds too thick, the birds gone silent, you can still trust the rise and fall beneath you. One of your crew mutters a superstition. If you sleep when the swell changes, your dreams will drift. It's half joke, half warning. So you stay alert. You shift your leg. Feel the roll. Count the seconds between lifts. 1, 2, 3. That's the northeast. Then 1.5 seconds. A twitchier rise. That's the southern swell, elbowing its way in. And then you feel it, subtle but unmistakable. A third motion, softer, from the northwest. You pause. Is it real or just your muscles playing tricks? You close your eyes and wait. There, again, definitely real. A third swell. Historians argue whether three-swell navigation was common or reserved for master voyagers, but either way, you're in it now. You call for a quick adjustment, nothing major, a slight rudder change. The canoe eases onto a better line, less yawing, less drag, smoother ride. Your team exhales as one. You're back in rhythm. You glance down and notice a trail of phosphorescence bubbling in your wake, green-blue sparks triggered by your motion, tiny organisms lighting up in the dark. It's beautiful, sure, but it's also useful. If your wake curves unexpectedly, you'll see it glow wrong. Another tool, another whisper from the sea. By dawn, you'll need to reassess. Swells can shift with wind, temperature, and time. But for now, you've got a clear feel, a solid pulse, and the stars above agreeing with the sea below. And that's as good as it gets. You sit cross-legged on the deck. A few birds overhead cry out, early risers. The crew stretches. Someone passes you coconut meat wrapped in leaves. You eat slowly. The canoe breathes again beneath you. Left swell, right swell, steady pitch. You smile. You're not just riding the ocean, you're reading it.
You rise slowly, one knee stiff from crouching too long, and glance upward. The sky is waking. Stars still dominate, but the horizon has begun its gentle bleaching, dark blue softening to bruised lavender. Soon, dawn will erase your celestial map. But for now, the stars still speak. You find Altair first, then Deneb, Vega, your triangle. They're slipping lower, heading west. You trace their arc with your eyes, letting your mind settle into the old pattern. These aren't just lights in the sky. They are guides, fixed points in a shifting world. And they never lied to you. Not once. The star compass you carry is invisible, no physical tool, just memory. Taught, tested, confirmed. The horizon around you is divided into 32 houses. Each one has a name. Each one belongs to a wind, a direction, a swell, or a bird. In Hawaiian, they call it the kapehu fuehtu. Inside a wall is the nung. Different names, same purpose. A mental wheel. And every star you see has a home on that wheel. You pick a new star now. Sirius. It's rising, brilliant and cold. It comes from the Manumalani house, southeast quadrant. That tells you the wind is still holding. You nod once. Your course remains true. No corrections needed, yet. You walk the canoe slowly, bare feet on woven matting. You pass sleeping crew. Their faces turned skyward, trusting you. One opens an eye as you pass, then closes it again. This is a moment of solitude, but not loneliness. You're never truly alone out here, not with the stars above and the ancestors beside. You remember your first lesson under the stars, sitting on a mat while your grandfather placed coral stones in a ring. Each stone was a star. He pointed. This one rises here. He moved his finger. That one sets there. You were maybe 7 years old, but it made sense. Not because you were smart, because it was true. He taught you the names in pairs, rising and setting, because direction is reciprocal. If a star rises at Manukoalo, it will set at Manukona. If you know where it comes from, you know where it's going. And more importantly, you know where you are. That's the beauty of the star compass. It's not just about direction, it's about position. When Arcturus is directly overhead, you're at the latitude of Hawaii. When the Southern Cross stretches just so, its bottom star a hand's width from the horizon, you know you're in the right band. This is the original GPS, except it's not global, it's personal. Scholars still debate how precise these measurements could be. Could ancient navigators really maintain a course over 2,000 miles using only stars and swells? Or were they just lucky, time and again? You chuckle at the thought. If you've ever spent 5 straight days counting stars while soaked in salt and doubt, you know luck runs out pretty fast. You pause near the stern. The Southern Cross looms large now, one of its arms dipping low. It's your north-south line. You draw it mentally, then extend it to the horizon. Polaris doesn't shine here, but that's okay. You have other markers. In the Carolines, they call it lube. The Southern Cross points toward home. Next to it, low on the horizon, hangs Canopus. Bright, pale, important. You note its position carefully. It rises earlier each night, inching forward like a candle through time. You file it away, part of your mental sky map. You'll need it tomorrow, and the day after that, and the one after that. The canoe shifts slightly, not wind, your imagination, or maybe fatigue. It's hard to tell. You shake your head and return your focus skyward. Now comes the transition. Stars begin to fade as the eastern horizon lightens. The big ones remain, like bosses lingering after a shift, but the minor stars, your filler stars, begin to slip away. You commit their final positions to memory. It's your last snapshot before the day blinds you. With the stars fading, your dependence shifts. You're not helpless without them. You just switch to different tools. You listen to the swell. You watch the color of the sky. You look for birds, for clouds, for the sheen of the sea. But even when they're gone, the stars stay in your head.
Their rising and setting times are burned into your rhythm. You'll know when they return, like friends coming back after a long lunch break. You crouch again, shading your eyes from the first flickers of sun. You look down now, not up. Time for a different kind of orientation. The canoe's shadow is faint, almost delicate, but it tells you something the stars can't. The sun's arc, the current's direction, the possible drift you may need to correct. The deck is warm now, the rope under your hand dry and scratchy. Morning has arrived. You stretch your back, arms high above your head. Your muscles ache, not from effort, but from vigilance. Star navigation isn't physically hard, it's mentally exhausting. One slip in memory and you're charting a course into nowhere. A soft voice beside you. How far? You smile. Maybe 1/3, maybe less. They nod. No disappointment, no celebration, just acceptance. There's still sea ahead, and that's how it should be. You sit, legs crossed, and chew on some dried breadfruit. Not because it's tasty, it's not, but because it's steady. Something solid while the world shifts around you. As you eat, you rehearse tonight's sky. You whisper the names. Makali'i, Hokulea, Mailap, Newe, Lub. You picture their arcs, their rise and set points, their zeniths. It's all there, invisible, but vibrant. A celestial grid etched in your mind. A scholar once wrote that the star compass isn't a tool, it's a worldview. You agree. It's not something you use, it's something you become. You don't just track the stars, you carry them, and they carry you. Somewhere to your east, beyond that brightening sky, your destination waits. Still invisible, still unreachable by sight, but not by knowledge, not by rhythm, not by faith. The sun breaks the horizon now, a fiery orange blade cutting through morning haze. The last stars vanish, the sea turns gold. You squint into the light, you adjust the sail, and you keep going.
The sun's higher now, casting warm, honest light across the deck. But you're not looking up anymore. You're looking straight ahead, your eyes narrowing at the flat line where sea meets sky. That's where you'll find your next clue. Not in the stars above, but in the position of the sun, the colors of the water, and, more mysteriously, in the exact moment a star disappears right over your head. Zenith stars. That's what you're tracking now. When a specific star passes directly overhead at night, it tells you one crucial thing: latitude. Not your general direction, not just eastish or south, but your position on the north-south axis of the Earth. It's not fancy, it's not flashy, but it's precise, razor sharp even. And when you've been at sea for weeks, that precision can mean the difference between making landfall or missing it by 100 silent, heart-crushing miles. You close your eyes and replay the sky from last night. You remember when Arcturus, Hokulea, rose, climbed, and then seemed to pause right at the top of the sky, straight above your mast. That pause, that perfect overhead moment, that was your confirmation. You were right on the Hawaiian latitude line, 20 degrees north, give or take a chicken feather. The science behind it is straightforward. Even if your grandfather never called it spherical geometry, every star has a declination, its own latitude, you could say. So when a star's zenith lines up directly above your head, it means you've hit its line. For Arcturus, it's around 19.5 degrees north.
For Canopus, it's roughly 53 degrees south, so that one's no help here unless you're really, really lost. You stand and glance upward again. Too late for zenith sightings now, but tonight, you'll watch for Sirius. If it culminates straight above, you'll know you've drifted a little south. Not catastrophic, but worth adjusting. Historians still argue how Polynesian navigators calculated these moments. Did they just feel it? Did they lie back on the deck and stare at the mast like a plumb line? Some believe they used hand measurements, outstretched arms to estimate height above the horizon. Others say they memorized how far the star should appear from the horizon if they were on course. Whatever the case, it worked. You head to the edge of the deck and sit cross-legged, letting your hand trail in the water. It's warmer today, and lighter in color. You lean over and peer down, greenish, almost turquoise. That tells you you've crossed into shallower water. Could be a sandbank below, or you're nearing an undersea shelf. Either way, you're watching for change, because change means possibility, and possibility might mean land. The crew shifts around you. One's still dozing, another is quietly mending a line with fingers like bird claws. You nod at them. No words needed. A good navigator is like a good drummer. You set the rhythm, and the whole band stays in sync. You pull out a small bundle from beneath a lashboard. Inside, a folded strip of bark cloth wrapped around polished pieces of shell. Not for decoration, for calibration. One shell you use to reflect starlight against the mast. Another has a tiny hole drilled in it, like a primitive viewfinder. When the right star enters that hole and sits at zenith, you've nailed it. It's not high-tech, but it's not low-tech either. It's just tech of a different kind. Funny thing, the first time you learned about zenith stars, you thought it sounded too perfect. A star passes directly overhead? Sure. And then what, a sea turtle claps for you? But then it happened. You watched Arcturus climb, higher and higher. And then it stopped, right above. And the wind changed at that exact moment. You felt it. The ocean whispered yes. That was the moment you stopped doubting. You glance up again. Sun's higher now. The stars are gone, but you still see them. Not with your eyes, with your rhythm. You know what's coming tonight. You've timed your journey to match the celestial cycle. You have to. Not every night gives you a zenith opportunity. Some stars rise too far off. Some culminate in daylight. Some you've already passed. But when it does happen, it's like finding a hidden doorway, one that only opens for a few minutes, only once per journey. And you step through. You call out gently to your helmsman. You gesture, a slight tilt to starboard. He adjusts without needing an explanation. He knows. Last night's zenith told you the truth, and the truth means course correction. Below deck, someone passes you a gourd. You sip coconut water slowly. Hydration matters. You've rationed it well, but the heat is rising, and you can't afford to lose focus. Not today. You wipe sweat from your forehead and look east. Nothing on the horizon. Not yet, but you can feel it. The light is different now. There's a haze, a shift in cloud texture. You'll check again in an hour. You stand again, and your knees complain. Not that you mind. They're good knees, and they've gotten you across half an ocean so far. A seabird glides by. Long tail, black cap. Could be a noyo. If it's flying towards the sun, it's probably heading out to fish, which means it came from land. You mark its path. If, at sunset, it turns and flies back the same way, then you'll follow it. But back to zeniths. You smile thinking of the southern hemisphere. If you were sailing from Tahiti to Hawaii, you'd watch the Southern Cross drop lower each night. By the time you hit the equator latitudes, it'd start flipping, stars switching positions. It's not just a compass trick, it's a confirmation that you're moving through zones, like pages in a cosmic book. There's a chant your teacher taught you. It goes through zenith stars like a checklist. It's not poetic, it's practical. Each line ends with a name, a house, a latitude. You used to sing it while paddling, half song, half GPS coordinate. You murmur it now, softly, almost like a lullaby. One of your crewmates joins in, then another. Soon, 4 of you are humming. It's not loud, not ceremonial, just quiet, working harmony, like reef fish brushing coral. The sun hits noon. Shadows vanish. Heat intensifies. You duck beneath the boom and rest beneath a small deck awning out of direct light. You let your eyes close, not to sleep, but to remember. You replay the stars from last night, from the night before. You track their rise and fall. You visualize their zenith arcs like streaks of chalk across a dark ceiling. Your star compass doesn't switch off at dawn, it just goes inward. You breathe deep. When the sun sets tonight, you'll be ready. You'll find your next zenith. You'll feel the swell align again, and the ocean will confirm what the stars already told you. You're still on track. You always were.
Morning bleeds into late day. The sky sharpens. Shadows return. Heat recedes from the deck planks, and the breeze picks up slightly, bending your sail just enough to make the ropes hum like a well-tuned instrument. And there, against that steady rhythm, you spot it, a black speck in the sky, high and fast, slicing a curved path across the blue. A bird. You stand without a word, your heart taps your ribs, not panic, possibility. You follow it with your eyes. Long wings, wedge tail, no flapping, just effortless gliding. A frigate bird, Frigata minor. And now your crew sees it too. 2 more rise from the horizon, spiraling on thermals. They aren't out here for fun. They're scouting, hunting, nesting. You watch the path. They're heading east. And that tells you something simple and staggering. Land is near. You know this not from wishful thinking, but from experience. Frigate birds don't land on water. They can't. Their feathers aren't waterproof. So if they're out here, circling like scouts, they're within flying range of solid ground, which means so are you. You signal for calm. No cheering. No jumping to conclusions. The ocean has teased you before, but this is real. You step to the bow, eyes squinting east. No island yet, no dark shape on the horizon, but you weren't expecting to see it. Not yet. You watch the birds disappear into the haze, angling slightly northward. Your compass brain kicks in. You estimate 60, maybe 80 miles. That's nothing now. Less than a day's travel. You adjust the tiller slightly. Just a fingertip's worth of change. Enough to follow that invisible arrow drawn by wings. The bird signs are only the beginning. You start looking for more. Floating debris. Driftwood. A frond of palm. Something bobbing in the water that doesn't belong in open sea. Historians debate whether Polynesian navigators truly relied on these last-minute land indicators or whether they were just confirmation of an already flawless route. But you've always known the truth. It's both. You sail with the stars and you land with the birds. You remember being a child and watching your teacher hold a Noyo chick in his hands, gently stroking its back. He said, "When this bird returns at dusk, you follow it home." You never forgot. The bird knew. You just had to believe it. And now, standing in the fading light, you do believe. You grab a small woven cage near the supply cache. Inside, restless feathers ruffle. A frigate bird of your own, carried since departure, waiting for this moment. You walk to the bow, whisper something only you and the ancestors understand, and lift the latch. The bird rockets upward like a prayer with wings, circles once, twice, then veers off sharply, east, northeast. You follow it until it vanishes, heart thudding with a strange mix of certainty and longing. If it doesn't come back, you'll know it found land. If it circles aimlessly and returns,
Well, you'll keep waiting. Around you, the sea seems to lean in. Everything slows. The canoe rocks gently, as if sensing the change. A new rhythm pulses through the deck, a hush before arrival. Other birds begin to appear, terns, shearwaters, different sizes, different flight styles. Some dart low across the water, skimming for fish. Others ride the thermals like dancers. You begin mentally sorting them by behavior. Foraging birds go farther, nesting birds stay close. It's a quiet calculus, but every flap matters. You call over one of your crewmates, point to the sky, and trace an arc with your hand. She nods, then passes the message along. Soon, the entire canoe is subtly adjusting course, not dramatically, just enough to aim for the invisible. You sit near the mast, knees hugged to your chest, and start singing softly. A bird chant, one of the old ones. It doesn't name species, it names patterns, the loops they make when they're tired, the sharp dives that mean reef fish, the wide spirals that mean islands. You hum each verse like a map written in wings. Once, during training, you asked your master, what if we misread them? What if they're just flying to fly? He smiled. Then, we fly with them anyway. At worst, we learn more sky. The chant steadies you. The crew hums along. It's not loud, just breath set to memory. And underneath it all, the canoe glides steady, confident. It knows what you know. You spot something in the water. At first, it's nothing, a speck, but then you see it rolling gently on a swell. Dark, fibrous. You lean over the side and scoop it up with a netted paddle. It's a coconut, green, fresh, still sealed. It didn't grow here. And now, you're sure. Land. Close. Not ours, not guesswork, just there. Hiding beyond the curve of the earth, you rub your thumb across the coconut's husk and smile. A floating postcard. The crew stirs again. No cheering still, but the tension is different now. A low electricity. The helmsman adjusts course by instinct. You nod approval. It's nearly dusk. The sun flattens on the horizon like a coin. Sky burns orange, then pink, then bruised purple. And now, the true test. The birds. You watch, you wait. And there it is, a Noyo returning. Alone, straight, no loops, no hesitation. It's flying towards something you still can't see, but the bird can, and so can you. If not with your eyes, then with everything else. You adjust the sail. The ropes creak. The canoe leans slightly into the new direction. The swell matches your turn, almost as if it had been waiting for permission. The stars begin to blink alive again, one by one. Sirius, Vega, Hokulea. They rise like witnesses. They confirm your heading. They congratulate your faith. You sit at the stern now, watching the flight paths crisscross the sky. There's a kind of choreography happening up there. Birds and stars, both dancing towards the same goal. You don't need to understand it all. You just need to keep moving with it. Somewhere out there, an island is waiting for you. It's already sending its children. They're flying, and you're following.
Night settles in, soft and silken. The last glow of the sun slips away behind you, and the sky opens into a vast bowl of velvet black. Stars flare into clarity, your old friends, blinking back to life. But tonight, you're not looking up quite as much. Tonight, your attention drops lower, much lower, into the sea and the sky just above it. Because this part of the voyage, this is where clouds start talking. And the water, if you're listening closely, will whisper secrets. The clouds are your first messengers. You stand near the center mast, hands loose, watching the horizon. Even now, with no land in sight, you start picking apart the formations above the water. One cloud to the southeast is tall and cotton white, tinged at the base with green-gray. Another further east looks like a dome, but with a strange glow underneath it. Subtle, like someone hid a lantern behind a bedsheet. You squint. There's no moon, no ship. So what's glowing? Lagoon light, that's what. You grin. It's a rare one, that particular trick. When an atoll lies just below the horizon, too far to see, its shallow sandy basin reflects the moonlight or even starlight upward. The base of the cloud above it picks up the tint. You can't see the island yet, but you can see its light bouncing into the sky. You whisper thanks to your old teacher, who once slapped you on the head for ignoring a glowing cloud. Land talks, he growled. You listen with your eyes. Historians still debate just how much trust Polynesian navigators placed in cloud shadows. Some claim it was a backup trick, useful only in clear conditions. Others say it was a frontline tool, especially for spotting low coral atolls that don't rise more than a few meters above sea level. Either way, you've used it. You've needed it. And tonight, it's here to help again. Your eyes drop lower to the ocean's surface. The moon's still hidden, but the stars are bright enough to make the water shimmer. You crouch at the side of the canoe and peer across the waves. The light plays tricks, yes, but you're trained for those tricks. You look for differences in texture, ripples that behave oddly. You notice a pattern to star reflections. In one area, they seem to wiggle more, like they're dancing. In another, they stretch thin, smeared across the surface. That tells you something. The calmer, silkier patch likely lies over deep water. But the choppier region with strange movements, that's a sign of a current or even a reef shelf below. You make a mental note. You're probably skimming the outer reaches of a submerged island platform. And then there's color. Hard to catch at night, but during the day, the color of the water becomes your second sky. Pale turquoise, shallow sandbanks, bright blue, moderate depth, deep ultramarine, open ocean. You remember sailing past Riviva once, and the water there changed from black to royal blue to green in less than a mile. You were young then, almost too stunned to keep the course, but your master just smiled and said, "She's lifting her skirt. Let her." Back on deck, one of your younger crew members approaches you. She's been watching the clouds too, sketching them in her mind, noting their shapes. You gesture toward the east, where that strange glow still lingers beneath the cloud base. She nods. She saw it too. You don't need to explain it. She's learning. And you're remembering. You're remembering how your master once stood in a storm, soaked to the bone, shouting instructions about reflected brightness while lightning snapped across the sky? You thought he was losing it, but later you realized he wasn't looking at the storm. He was looking beyond it, for the soft haze that meant shelter. Funny the things that stay with you. Another clue rides the wind now. A faint smell. Not salt, not fish. Something greener, earthier. You sniff. Is that pandanus? Or maybe wet bark? Smells travel differently over water. In calm air, they can drift for dozens of miles. A sign you're entering the invisible aura of an island. It hasn't shown itself yet, but you're inside its reach. The wind angle changes, slightly, but enough to catch your attention. You tilt your head, listening. The sail tugs a little differently now. The swell shifts, becomes slower, more rhythmic. The long pulse of the open ocean gives way to something else, shorter waves, layered, like heartbeat and breath overlapping. It's called wave refraction. Not that you'd ever call it that, but it's the principle. The long Pacific swell hits underwater landforms, reefs, shoals, drop-offs, and bounces, redirects. Sometimes the returning swell clashes with the incoming one, forming crosshatched patterns. And that, too, is a sign. You adjust your footing. The canoe tips ever so slightly, less lift between swells, which means you're gliding over something not quite open sea anymore. You reach down and touch the water. It's warmer here. Not because of the sun, but because shallow water doesn't insulate the way deep water does. It catches heat and holds it like a skin. You knew this instinctively even before someone explained it. The sea has moods. Warmth means welcome.
Some sailors scoff at these soft signs. They want hard lines, precise tools. But you've lived with this sea long enough to know that nothing here is hard or precise. It's alive. It breathes in clouds, sings in wave textures, and changes color depending on its mood. And if you listen long enough, it talks back. You call over the girl again and ask her to sit beside you. You point to the water. She leans over, mimicking your gaze. You tell her to watch the reflections, to smell the breeze, to track how the stars flicker and blur as the current shifts. She nods. She's not ready to navigate yet, but she's learning to read. And that's the first step. You lie back, hands behind your head, watching the stars reassert their dominance in the sky. But you don't forget the sea, or the clouds, or the strange way the air tastes sweeter now, like fruit just out of reach. Land may not be visible, but it's near. You can feel it. And tonight, that's enough.
You haven't seen land in days. Not clearly, not with your eyes. But that doesn't mean you're lost. In fact, you've never been more aware of where you are, because it lives in your head, not on paper. Every gust of wind, every pull of the swell, every degree the stars shift, all of it is mapped inside you. Welcome to Dead Reckoning. But don't be fooled by the name. It's never about being dead sure. It's about being constantly alive to everything. You wake early, before the crew, before the birds. The world is quiet, dark. You sit near the stern and begin your morning ritual, not with a prayer, but with a calculation. You think back to the last island you left. You picture its shape, its reef, the curve of its coastline, and then you begin to trace your course. 3 days on a northeast heading under Hokula'ea, 1 day under high clouds with partial wind, another night drifting under neutral stars. You adjust for leeway, the sideways slide caused by current. You subtract for the short squall that pushed you south, and now you estimate. You've traveled maybe 700 nautical miles. Not in a straight line, of course. No one ever does. But your brain has made thousands of micro-adjustments, course corrections that no compass could measure and no GPS could outthink. It's all stored in there. The ocean's movement became your abacus. You rise and pace the length of the canoe. It's a habit now, almost unconscious. 4 paces, pause, turn. 4 paces again, not just to stretch your legs, but to feel the balance of the craft. If the canoe leans even slightly off-center, that tells you something. The sail might be pulling unevenly, or the current might be shifting, or your last mental position was just a degree off. You note it all, you record nothing, but you remember everything. Dead reckoning, to an outsider, sounds reckless. You're just guessing, they might say. But you're not. You're tracking, constantly. Some scholars still argue whether early Polynesians truly used this method in deep ocean voyages, or if their routes relied more on luck and island hopping. But you've lived the answer. You are the moving map. Your crew begins to stir. One by one, sleepy-eyed sailors arise and stretch their routines, fluid and practiced. No one asks, "Where are we?" They know you'll tell them if they need to know, and right now, they trust that you do. You sit again and run the course backward. You call it threading the wake. You review every landmark you passed, every heading taken, every change in the swell. It's like mentally rewinding a film in your head. If you can rewind it smoothly, without breaks or confusion, then your navigation is solid. If you can't, you adjust. That's the secret. You're never really on course. You're constantly returning to it, like correcting a wobble in a spinning top. Tiny inputs, done with feel. And this canoe, this crew, this ocean, they all give you feedback. You just have to stay humble enough to listen. And that includes listening to yourself. You recall a moment from your apprenticeship, a night when you were convinced the island was due east, only to be shown, gently but clearly, that you'd misjudged the current. Your master didn't scold you. He just said, if you're never wrong, you're not really sailing. You never forgot that. You call over the youngest crew member, barely 10, all knees and curiosity. You hand him a small stick. Point the swell direction, you say. He looks nervous, but complies. Now point where you think we've traveled in the last hour. He hesitates, then angles the stick north by east. You nod. Close, but the current's drifting us a little west. Next time, adjust your angle. His face lights up, not because he was right, but because he was included. That's part of Dead Reckoning too, training the next mind to carry the map. Later that day, a cloud builds on the western horizon. A soft mass, slow-moving, but dark at the base. You narrow your eyes. A squall, maybe. You don't panic. You simply rerun your mental course and estimate how wind shift might tilt your position. You prep the crew, not with fear, but with readiness. Every squall is a teacher. And then something small but vital. The swell changes. Barely. Just a hair's width of difference in the angle. You close your eyes and feel it through the soles of your feet. That's new. The main swell from the east is still there, but now there's another, smaller pulse underneath, coming from the northeast. That tells you something. It's refracted, a secondary swell bouncing off land, maybe an atoll platform or island shelf. You feel its rhythm, count its pulse, compare it to the memory of similar patterns. You adjust your estimate again. You're closer than you thought. That night you don't sleep much, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. You're beginning to sense the edges of the journey, the final stretch, the place where the course in your head will soon collide with physical reality. And when that happens, when you see the land you've only imagined, it's like watching a painting come to life. The stars are clear again. Your go-to constellation, Ka Lupe o Cavallo, points just left of your bow. You've tracked it for days. It's been rising slightly earlier each night, like a friend keeping pace with your progress. Now you measure its height. 22 fingers above the horizon. Just as you predicted. You smile. You're exactly where you thought you'd be. Even though you've never seen a single sign of land, even though there's no map in your hands, you are the map. And tomorrow, it will draw itself in green and sand. You sit cross-legged in the canoe's quiet belly, surrounded by coral stones laid in a careful circle. They shift with each wave, but never scatter. They're bound not by glue, but memory. Each stone stands for a star. Each gap between them, a path. And in your mind, 1,000 routes bloom like spider webs strung between those silent rocks. This isn't superstition. This is science, written in stone. You're chanting now, low, rhythmic, almost a hum. The words aren't spells, they're directions. The pig rises under the shark's tail, then swims past the breadfruit. It sounds like nonsense to an outsider, but you know every metaphor hides a pattern. The pig is the star Altair. The shark's tail is Scorpius. Breadfruit, that's where Canopus rides the southern sky. This chant maps a voyage from Samoa to Tahiti by way of the heavens. You repeat it again, slower this time. You're not just memorizing, you're replaying. Your brain is syncing the stars overhead with the stone model at your feet. This coral compass isn't fixed to the canoe, it lives in you. But when your bones ache or your confidence wobbles, you lay it out again, a physical anchor for an invisible journey. You weren't always this fluent. Back then, you were a boy with bruised knees, dragged from sleep before dawn, stumbling after your teacher as he paced shorelines with coral pieces in a bag slung over his shoulder. He'd squat, toss out the stones, and say, "Where are we?" You'd panic. You'd guess, sometimes wrong, sometimes lucky, but he wasn't listening to your answers. He was watching your posture. Did your hands hesitate? Did your eyes scan the horizon or the heavens? He wasn't teaching you stars. He was teaching you confidence without arrogance. There's an old belief, some say myth, that the first Polynesian star compasses weren't even stone, but song, passed orally, never drawn. A chant you could sing in your head as you traveled. With each line, you'd tick off a position, a heading, a checkpoint in the Great Sea Road. One Hawaiian chant has over 400 lines, each one tied to a celestial cue. Historians still argue whether the full version survived or if we've just got fragments of the melody today,
But you've heard enough. Enough to piece it together. Enough to feel it. Now you teach your own crew. You call them over. 4 of them this time. One brings a shell bowl of water. You nod. That's how your teacher taught you. Reflection reveals the star if the sky hides it. You place the bowl between the coral compass and the canoe's prow. When the stars rise tonight, they'll shimmer in that shallow dish, even if clouds hang low. You assign each crew member a cardinal point, north, south, east, west. You call out stars and they respond with bearings. You correct a few, but softly. This isn't a test. This is calibration, not of tools, of people. And that's the secret most miss. Polynesian navigation isn't just about knowing where you are. It's about knowing how to hold that knowledge steady even when the sky vanishes, the swell tricks you, and your gut knots with uncertainty. The compass doesn't live in coral, or chants, or even stars. It lives in your body. Your teacher once told you, you carry your ancestors in your spine. You thought it was poetry. Later, you understood it was literal. Your spine is the axis, your chest the horizon, your outstretched arms the east and west. When you stand in the canoe and face Hokupua, the North Star, you become the needle. The chant is your heartbeat, the swell your breath. The ocean doesn't move around you, you move within it. You gather the coral stones and pack them away, not because you're done, but because you've seen what you need to see. You look up. The stars are beginning to wake up. First comes Sirius, bright and steady. Then Vigil. Then the Pleiades, like scattered pearls tossed across the black silk of night. Your eyes track them automatically. You barely have to think now. This sky is your script, and you've read it 100 times before. And then your favorite moment of the night. You lie back, the sky filling your entire view, and let your body go still. The canoe rocks gently. The stars drift leftward. But in your mind, you are still. The sky is moving, and each star traces a perfect arc across your mental grid. You can see them setting in order, ticking off the hours like a cosmic clock. One of your crew joins you. She's quiet, but bright, sharp eyes, quick hands. You ask her, where's east right now? She doesn't point. She turns her head, aligns her body, and says, here. You smile. She's close. You whisper, don't point, become the compass. She nods and says nothing, but you can tell she gets it. You rise and check the stars once more. You count finger widths above the horizon. You align the mast shadow with your body's orientation. The swell tells you you're still on course. The stars confirm it. And the chant? Still humming in the back of your throat. The pig rises under the shark's tail, then swims past the breadfruit. You whisper it again, letting it rock you into a trance, not for sleep, but for certainty, for motion within stillness, for a world where every stone, wave, and word aligns. You think of Mal Pialug, who sailed the Hokulea without a compass, without a chart, guided only by what his grandfather whispered into his ears as a boy. And you feel proud. Not proud of yourself, proud to stand in that lineage, proud to be a link in that unbroken chant. Tomorrow, you might need the compass again, or not. Either way, it will be ready, because it lives in you. You wake to a silence that's too heavy. The usual rhythm, the flap of sails, the hiss of water, the creak of lashings has gone still. It's the kind of silence that leans in close, like it knows something you don't. It's the kind of silence that tastes like warning. Then, the first drop hits your forehead. You open your eyes. The stars are gone. The bowl of water, once shimmering with constellations, is dark. The air is thicker now, heavy with salt and something electric, like the sky itself is holding its breath. You sit up and look around. The horizon has vanished. The sea and sky have merged into one smudged smear of charcoal. You blink. Still no stars, still no moon, just darkness, pure and waiting.
The storm isn't here yet, but it's coming. You stand, test the mast, the lines, the outriggers. Everything is as it should be, but you aren't. Your gut tightens, your throat dries, and that chant in your head begins to stutter. You try again. The pig rises under the... It's no good. You lose the rhythm. So you switch gears. You call for the crew. Voices answer. Everyone's accounted for. That helps. Barely. You bark quiet orders, stow loose gear, tie down bundles, furl the sail. No one panics. They've practiced this. Still, they don't smile. Even the sea turtles have disappeared. And then the wind shifts. It comes not as a whisper, but a shove. A great invisible hand flattens your chest. You stagger, squint into it. Sheets of rain whip sideways across the deck. The ocean flares up with it like it's finally lost its patience. Waves slap the hull like angry hands. You drop the sail. You are no longer steering toward anything. There is no toward. There is only away from being flipped, away from being shattered. You tighten the lashings, grip the steering oar, not to guide, but to survive. This is not the part of the journey anyone sings about. This is the part they survive to sing about. You glance at the horizon again, nothing but black. The stars are drowned. The clouds are so thick you can't even tell where the sky ends and the ocean begins. Historians still argue whether early Polynesians avoided open ocean travel during storm season or simply embraced the risk. But one thing is certain, when a storm like this finds you, your calendar doesn't matter anymore. And then come the swells. Not the gentle ones you rode like lullabies back on day 2. These ones punch, they twist. The canoe begins to yaw, rock, twist, buck. The lashings stretch to their limits. You pray they don't snap. You remember your teacher once told you sometimes the ocean reminds you that you're made of water too. You didn't get it then. You do now. Rain pours into your mouth when you breathe. You taste the sky. One crew member vomits. Another huddles, eyes closed, whispering a chant meant for funerals. You don't stop her. You understand. And yet somewhere in your spine, something strange flickers to life. Not fear, not courage, trust. Not trust in safety, trust in the canoe, in the wood, in the lashings, in your ancestors' math. You're not in control anymore, but you are present. The night drones on. You lose count of hours. You press one hand to the hull. It's shivering, but not cracking. Your other hand grips the oar. Every so often you lean, shift, and the canoe listens. Tiny corrections. That's the game now. You start chanting, not the navigation chant, but the one for calm, the one your grandfather whispered after storms. It's soft, steady. You're not sure if the ocean hears it, but you do, and that's enough. And then, sometime just before dawn, the wind lets go. It doesn't stop all at once. It eases like a giant exhaling. The rain fades to mist. The swells quiet, not flat, not calm, just cooperative. You dare a breath, and you hear something you hadn't in hours. Silence. No shouting, no splashing. Just breath and wood and water. You look up. One star, tiny, faint, Hokuba, the North Star. You weep, not big sobs, just quiet water from your eyes that feels like homecoming. You whisper the first line of the chant again. The pig rises, and this time it flows. The sky returns in pieces, Orion. The Pleiades, the Southern Cross, you count them like old friends re-entering the room one by one, sheepish but welcome. You don't resume your course right away. First you check the crew. Everyone's there, shaken, wet, alive. One man has a rope burn across his chest, another lost a sandal. You share dried taro and coconut. No one jokes. Not yet. You run your hand along the hull again. You find new cracks, scars. But nothing fatal. She held. She always holds.
Your canoe isn't a vehicle, it's a companion. It's your double-hulled soul. And she survived a test most humans never even meet. Now gently, you call the crew back to stations. The sail goes up, not fully, just a cautious triangle. You don't need speed now, just direction. The swells are smaller, your feet feel them. That familiar pulse returns, east to west, west to east. You find the pattern again like a heartbeat settling after a panic. Someone finds the water bowl. It's still half full. You squat beside it, gaze into its mirror surface, and wait. A pinprick of light enters. Then two, they reflect across the ripples like floating petals. The path returns. You haven't changed course, but you've passed through something. The chant continues. The compass steadies, and now you know. Storms don't erase your map. They reveal whether it lives in you.
You rise that morning changed, not dramatically, not with a trumpet blast or a triumphant pose, just quieter. Like the storm didn't just scrape your canoe, it scraped your soul too, smoothing off noise you didn't know you carried. You adjust your sennit belt, check the sail. Your fingers move more slowly now, but with care. You no longer rush, you listen. And that's when you remember who you are. You're not just a sailor, not just a passenger in a canoe made of breadfruit tree and dreams. You're the navigator. In Polynesian culture, that title is more than a job. It's sacred. You are, in a way, the priest of this floating world. The wind speaks to you. The stars follow you. The ancestors? Yeah, them too. They're not gone. They're just watching quietly to see if you remember what they taught you. You do. You rise to your knees and murmur the chant, not for the stars this time, but for the sea. The chant calls the name of every current between here and Haiva Oa. You don't say it to control the water. You say it so you don't forget who sails through it. Because here's the thing. Your canoe is the altar, and you're both priest and offering. You scan the horizon again. The sun climbs slowly, slanting gold across the deck. You mark the angle of the shadows. The back of your hand feels the wind. You sniff it. You taste it. Yes, this is the wind you waited for. It comes not in gusts, but in long, steady breaths. A good day for trusting the sail. And then you do something you haven't done since before the storm. You smile. The others notice it. One man chuckles. Another woman hums an old melody under her breath, an easy one used when fishing lines are cast. It's not joy yet, but it's hope, floating between you. You reach for your star compass, not one carved in stone or sketched on a map. This one lives in your skull, a ring of cardinal points. You name them softly under your breath. Manu, Nalani, Noyo. Each point corresponds to a rising star. Each star sings of a direction, of a bearing, of a promise. Historians still debate whether this mental star compass evolved over centuries or was transmitted through deeper ancestral memory. Either way, you don't question it. You just use it. You lie back, using your own body to recalibrate. Your head is due north, your toes south. You feel for the swell beneath you. The ocean speaks in rhythms, east to west, west to east. The cross swells are gentler now, layered like two heartbeats in conversation. You move your hands outward, naming each quadrant. One by one, you identify the intersection of swells, the sun's path, and the faintest rise in the cloud formations over the western rim. You don't steer with instruments. You steer with your bones. The role you hold, navigator, is called wayfinder in English, but that word hardly does it justice. In some islands, you're known as Pwa, a title bestowed in a sacred initiation that few outsiders ever witness. You remember yours. You were 17. Nervous. Elbows scraped from reef dives.
Your master had taken you out past the lagoon and said nothing for 6 days, just watched. And then, one night, without looking at you, he said, "Now find us home." And you did. You hoped you did. You chanted. You felt the swells. You closed your eyes and leaned into the void. You were off by 4 degrees. But that night changed everything. Because he smiled. You didn't need to be perfect. You needed to remember. Now, years later, you're the one holding that sacred knowledge. You don't write it down. You live it. Polynesian wayfinding was never about charts or compasses. It was about tuning your senses to a landscape that never stops shifting. Like today, for instance. You've noticed the swell has thickened slightly, pulsing more forcefully every 6 seconds. That's a northern swell, probably born from a storm thousands of miles away, still whispering its journey. You adjust your sail to compensate, not a full correction, just a nudge. Tiny corrections. The ocean likes those. As midday arrives, you gather the crew. They sit quietly, eyes on you. You reach into the satchel and remove a smooth, oval coral stone, your memory marker. You lay it on the deck, then another and another. Each stone represents a night of sailing, a shift in bearing, a remembered landfall long past. Some outsiders say it's superstition, but the way you see it, if someone can remember all those nights across all those voyages, they've earned the right to use stones. Besides, it works. Each stone brings you closer, not just to your destination, but to the mind of those who've gone before. And now you speak softly, recounting aloud the route. We left the lagoon on the 3rd night of the waxing moon, Hoku Pa to the shoulder, then Noyo at the forehead, crossed the white-backed swells. You're not talking to them. You're talking to yourself. They know that. They respect it, because on this canoe, your voice is the compass, your memory the rudder, and your presence the anchor keeping everyone from drifting, physically or spiritually. One of the younger crew, maybe 17 himself, sidles closer. He asks you softly if he can try the chant. You nod. He begins, haltingly. You don't interrupt. His rhythm is off. He skips one bird name. But he's trying. So you slide over a coral stone, hand it to him, and say, "Place this when you remember." He blinks, nods, places it. Just slightly to the right. You don't correct him. He'll remember. He's paying attention. And when this voyage is done, maybe you'll ask him, "Now, find us home." Because that's how this knowledge lives. Not in scrolls, but in shared breath and salts and bruised fingers. As evening creeps in, the clouds glow gold at the edges. You spot a booby bird circling far ahead, an omen of good wind. The crew watches you for the signal. You raise 2 fingers. They smile. Tomorrow, maybe you'll spot land. Maybe not. But tonight you are steady. The canoe hums beneath you. The stars prepare their re-entry, and your mind, your ancient compass, waits.
You weren't always the one at the front of the canoe with salt-stiff robes and a memory of stars in your head. Once, you were the kid who tripped on the outrigger beam, who slipped on seaweed, who asked too many questions at the wrong time. You remember that version of you, the one who sat at the very back of the canoe, cross-legged, sunburnt, pretending not to cry when the paddle splinters dug into your palm. You'd been apprenticed young. Not because you were ready, but because someone saw something. Your uncle probably, or maybe the village priest who said your dreams had the scent of voyages. That was the phrase, the scent of voyages. It sounded beautiful at the time. Less so when you were knee-deep in a tidal flat full of sea urchins, holding a broken fish basket and getting yelled at by an elder navigator with the patience of a snapping crab. Training wasn't gentle. You didn't get gold stars. You got bruises. You got cold tarot. You got glares if you confuse Hikianalia for Capella. You got shoved awake in the middle of the night and told to identify swells by fingertip alone. And if you messed up, They didn't scold you. They made you try again, over and over, until your body remembered what your brain kept dropping. One lesson still haunts you. That midnight test, your first time at sea alone. The canoe wasn't even in open water, just off the reef. Still, it felt like you'd been abandoned. The others had paddled to shore. Your mentor had just said, "Wait. Listen. Name the winds when they change." You waited. You cried. You sang softly, even though you weren't supposed to. You named the winds. Wrong names, but you stayed. That was the point. Now you glance toward the apprentice behind you. He's doing the same thing you once did, pretending not to watch your every move. You smile, but only slightly. He doesn't need encouragement yet. He needs pressure. Pressure polishes. The reef polishes the shell. The wind polishes the chant. The journey polishes the heart. Your fingers drum the deck slowly, a rhythm to match the swell. You call to him. What direction is the second swell coming from? He hesitates, then answers. Southeast? From maybe 2 days ago? You pause. Correct. Not exact, but enough. You toss him a shell. You'll be asked again at sunset, you say. He nods. You were lucky to survive your training, not because it was cruel, but because it was truthful. Navigators don't lie to apprentices. If you lie, people die. That's the unspoken law. Historians today still struggle to grasp how this knowledge survived across thousands of miles with no paper trail, no charts, no compasses. The answer is simple. You made the apprentice suffer just enough to remember. When your hands were raw from paddling, when your eyes hurt from stargazing, when your legs cramped from crouching too long in a canoe that didn't care about comfort. That's when the chant finally stuck. That's when the choral markers clicked. That's when the mind map stopped being a thing you tried to see and became a thing that was just there. It helped, of course, that the community wrapped itself around the apprentice. You were never truly alone. The women fed you. The elders tested you. The priests prayed for you. The fishermen teased you. The children followed you, whispering your mistakes with glee. But it was all part of the process. Everyone invested in you because one day you'd be their bridge to somewhere else, or their only hope of coming back. You remember your master's face clearly even now. He had one eye gone cloudy from salt exposure. His voice was soft, not because he was weak, but because you listened harder when he whispered. He rarely praised, but once after a particularly brutal rain-crossed voyage, he patted your shoulder and said, "You remembered the swell that mattered." Just that. And it carried you through 1,000 storms. Now, years later, you repeat his words to your own apprentice. Not often, but once when he caught the shift in cloud underside color right before you did, you murmured it. His eyes lit up. You're not building a replacement. You're building continuity. Your apprentice will one day teach the next one. The songs might change slightly, the names of the stars might slip or stretch, but the pattern, the method, will stay. Because the ocean hasn't changed, and neither has the need to read it. That's the sacred thread. It stretches backwards past your grandfather's grandfather, past the first canoe that ever left Savaii, past the moment when a human first dared leave the visible shore. And it stretches forward, too, to whoever this apprentice teaches, to whoever trusts the night sky more than a GPS, to whoever listens harder than they speak. You lean back, let the salt wind lift your hair. The canoe moves easily now. The sea has forgiven your passage for now. Your apprentice stares at the horizon, lost in a thought you don't interrupt. You remember being that boy, that shadow. Now you are the one casting the silhouette. You reach down and touch the worn coral map again, its stones shifted slightly from deck vibration. You realign them. Add one for today. It's not ritual. It's record. The ocean takes no notes. So you do, with coral, with rhythm,
with breath. And when your apprentice dozes off in the mid-afternoon warmth, head resting against the outrigger beam, you do not wake him. Let him dream of star paths and bird flights. Let him imagine the sacred ceremony he will one day pass through. You did, and look where you are. Your bones ache, your voice has rough edges now, your eyes squint more than they used to. But your mind holds thousands of miles, entire archipelagos, constellations, the laughter of islands, the silence of storms, all alive, all stored, all ready to pass on. That's what you are now, a keeper of ocean memory. And today, like every day at sea, is a good day to remember.
It begins as a shimmer. You're lying on your back, arms folded behind your head, when something flickers at the edge of the sky. Not lightning, not cloud. A different kind of shimmer, low and greenish, too low for sky and too bright for sea. You sit up. No one speaks, but everyone knows. You all rise, slowly, like dancers trained in the same rhythm, like people who've heard the drum before it's played. You step to the edge of the deck, eyes narrowed, squinting against the glint of the water. There, just at the place where horizon meets nothing, something breaks the pattern. A curve in the cloud, a rise in the swell, a faint green blush beneath the clouds. Land. Your breath catches. You don't cheer. Not yet. Land can lie. Mirage, heat tricks, illusions made of too much hope. But this has weight. The clouds above it stand taller, puffier. The undersides tinge that peculiar lagoon glow, green mixed with gray, as if the ocean were reflecting its own secret. A minute passes. Then another. Then someone points, slowly, reverently. Floating in the waves, drifting toward your canoe, is a husk of something. A coconut. Everyone sees it, and that's when the joy comes. You shout, you laugh, you slap the side of the hull. One crew member leaps up and does a wobbly little dance. The apprentice wipes his eyes and tries to pretend it's just sea spray. It isn't. You all know it. You shout the name of the island you hope it is. Maybe it's Hiva-Oa, maybe Ravatanga, maybe a new name entirely. It doesn't matter. The land is real. It exists. It waited for you. And more importantly, you found it. No compass, no charts. Just memory, just chant, just faith. You adjust the sail. Not too much. You still need to ride the swell carefully. The closer you get, the trickier the sea becomes. Shoals, reefs, sudden shifts. Historians still argue whether early Polynesians had precise ways of mapping underwater ridges from a distance. Some suggest they noticed bird behaviors. Others say they sensed the changes in wave frequency, something felt more than seen. You don't know the full answer, but you do feel something. The rhythm changes. The swell shortens. The canoe responds differently, a subtle kick beneath the hull like a horse that senses home. You lean into the steering paddle, adjusting ever so slightly. The apprentice leans forward too, mimicking your posture. He's learning. Even in this moment of excitement, he watches. Good. Now the birds appear. First one, then three, then a whole cloud of them. Frigate birds mostly, with their long, sharp wings. A few noddies arcing low and fast. They spiral and loop and dive, returning again and again to the same invisible point on the horizon. They don't need maps either. They just know. As you sail closer, you smell it before you see it clearly. Earth, Trees, a faint, sweet scent of flowers you don't recognize. The wind carries it just for a moment, and it's like the island is reaching for you. Finally, the shape sharpens. It's not flat. It rises steep and jagged in places, with green draped like cloth over volcanic stone. Trees ripple along the ridgeline. The beach glows pale and clean. Your heart pounds, not from effort, but from awe. You made it. You actually made it. A journey of nearly 2,000 miles stitched together by nothing but starlight, seaweed, and muscle. You look down at your hands, calloused, sun-dark, trembling slightly, not from fear, from relief. You step to the front of the canoe. This next part is not technical, it's spiritual. You kneel. The apprentice watches, eyed wide. The crew falls silent. You press your forehead to the deck. This is for the ancestors. You whisper thanks, not loudly, not dramatically, just the names of those who came before, the ones who taught you, the ones you never met, the ones whose chants still echo when the moon is high and the stars are singing. And then you do something that makes your apprentice gasp. You take the coral markers, the whole map you've built over weeks, and gently push them into the sea. One by one. The stones sink slowly, vanishing into the deep. You let them go, because you don't need them anymore. The journey is over. But more than that, it's about trust. You trust the ocean. You trust memory. You trust that even now the knowledge lives not in stones, but in skin, in blood, in him, your apprentice. You stand again, lighter somehow. The island is calling now. It doesn't use words. It hums. It sings through the wind and the shape of the clouds. It beckons with every glint of reef, every swirl of sand beneath the water's skin. The crew readies the landing gear. The smaller paddles come out. The big sail is reefed. You slide toward shore with reverence, not speed. The waves break gently now. The canoe glides in. Your feet touch sand. Warm, solid, home. You fall to your knees again, not from drama, but from gratitude. You dig your fingers into the sand. It feels like bread dough, like memory, like proof. Your apprentice stands beside you, silent, awed. You pass him a shell. He doesn't know what to do with it yet. That's fine. He'll learn. And so the landing becomes the beginning. You walk up the beach, your crew behind you. A new world waits. You'll explore it gently, plant things, build a shelter, maybe leave again in a year. Or maybe not. But either way, the path you took exists now. You proved it. Without maps, without metal, only stars, only stories, only the will to trust what lives between the waves.
You wake with the sea still in your ears. Even on land, your dreams are tidal. The rhythms you carried across the Pacific do not leave just because the canoe rests on sand. They echo in the rustle of palm leaves, in the hush of morning rain slipping off thatched roofs, in the very beat of your heart. Your apprentice, now barefoot and curious, walks through the village with you. The locals, cousins, strangers, perhaps even descendants of voyagers past, offer gifts. Food wrapped in leaves, shells filled with coconut oil, flowers threaded into garlands. Their eyes flick toward the canoe still bobbing near the reef, and then to you. They know what it means. You made it. And that means they can, too.
Days pass in a rhythm slower than the voyage, but no less purposeful. You help rebuild the canoe's rigging, fixing wear from weeks of strain. You map the island by foot, climb its ridges, drink its streams. It's not just about survival. It's about understanding the spirit of the land, about listening to how this island breathes. Some nights, around a smoky fire, you tell the story of the journey, not with boasts or exaggeration, but with reverence. You name each star that guided you, each wind that tested you, each bird that flew the invisible flag of landfall before your eyes could see it. Your apprentice listens most closely. He doesn't ask questions during the stories. He knows better. The questions come later, and whispers, in the hush between sleep and waking. Sometimes, a child will sit in your lap and ask, "Is it true? You crossed the sea with no map?" And you'll smile and say, "Not no map, just no paper." Then you'll tap your temple. "The map's in here." It always was. Back at the waterline, the canoe rests like a dreaming animal. The tide shifts around it, but it doesn't drift far. You check it every morning, run your hands along the planks. The wood is weathered but sound. Like you. You begin teaching. Not just your apprentice, but the community. Some are young, some are older than you, yet still eager to learn. You show them how to read the night sky without bending their necks, how to listen to the wave patterns even through sand, how to tell the time by moon shadow and tree frog. The knowledge spreads, not like wildfire, but like roots. Quiet, deep, persistent. You sketch the star compass in the sand and little hands try to copy it. You tell stories of distant islands and elders nod as if remembering a long-lost tune. You lay coral stones in circles again, this time not for memory, but for teaching. Your apprentice is watching, always watching. Sometimes you wake to find him walking alone along the tide line, murmuring chants to himself, testing his recall. You don't interrupt. That's part of it. He's beginning to carry the burden. And the gift. You take him out one day, just the two of you, into deeper water. Not far, just far enough for land to become a suggestion, not a certainty. You give him the steering paddle. He hesitates, then begins. His touch is unsure, but not fearful. You sit silently. He starts naming swells. 2, 3. A possible 4th. You wait. He names stars even in the day. You correct one. He accepts it and smiles. That night back by the fire, he doesn't speak of it, but he sits taller. You begin to imagine a future, not yours, but his. His voyages, his crew, his apprentice. Because you know this, nothing you brought across the sea was yours to keep, not the chants, not the stars, not even the canoe. They're all meant to be passed on. The historians type back on the mainland still debate how the knowledge survived. They say oral tradition is so fragile, so easily lost. But they're wrong. Oral tradition isn't fragile, it's living. It breathes. As long as someone listens, it survives. And when someone repeats it, it strengthens. The canoe didn't cross the ocean alone. It carried your mind, your master's voice, your ancestors' memory. It carried a whole cosmos curled into chants and star lines. You sharpen a paddle by moonlight, and the apprentice asks, "When do I know I'm ready to lead?" You look up. When the stars trust you. He blinks, laughs nervously. "You'll know," you add more gently. "There's no ceremony,
No title. One day, the canoe will wait for you to speak, and you will. He nods, swallows. You see it settle into him, not as pressure, but as invitation. A few weeks later, he leads a short trip to the neighboring island, just 2 days away. He returns sunburned and ecstatic. He brought back breadfruit and pride. And now the canoe is his, in the way it once was yours. You walk the beach alone that evening, the sand cool underfoot, the stars bloom overhead. You lie down and trace the ones you know by name. They're old friends now. And maybe someday, someone else will trace them and call them by different names. That's okay. The stars don't mind. They shine just the same. The ocean doesn't care about exactness. It cares about listening. And you? You listened. You endured. You remembered. You taught. And in doing so, you've become part of the sea's story. Part of its map. Not a paper one. Not even a stone one, but a living one. Carved into the breath of those who dare to leave shore.
The morning is slow, wrapped in the scent of wood smoke and wet pandanus. You rise not because of urgency, but because habit wakes you before the sun does. Out on the beach, the ocean glows with that particular silver sheen it wears when the sky is just beginning to stretch. Your apprentice is already at the canoe, running his hand along the outrigger, murmuring softly. You smile to yourself. He's doing what you once did, talking to the wood as if it remembers, as if it answers. Maybe it does. You walk together, barefoot and silent, toward the eastern edge of the island. There's a small rise there, not tall enough to be a hill, but just high enough to see the horizon without obstruction. You sit. He does too. "I think I'm ready," he says. You nod. Not because you've been waiting to hear it, but because you've already seen it. The readiness has been growing in him for weeks, maybe months. It glows around him now like heat off sun-warmed stone. He doesn't need your approval anymore, just your blessing. You reach into your satchel, old, cracked, still holding salt in its seams, and pull out a small item. A charm carved from whalebone, passed to you from your own master. It's not a tool. It's not magical. It's not even beautiful. But it matters because it represents memory. You place it in his hand. He doesn't speak. He only presses it to his chest and breathes. And so the cycle continues. Later that week, you help him lash the canoe for another journey. This one longer, riskier, his idea. You don't argue. Instead, you make sure every line is tight, every lash doubled. He'll lead it, but he'll do so with your care woven into the very knots that hold the vessel together. The departure is quiet. A few villagers gather. No great speech, no grand procession, just a small crew, determined eyes, and a gentle breeze that promises not safety, but honesty. The sea never lies. It only demands that you listen. You watch them vanish into the morning, sail shrinking against the endless blue. You don't feel fear. You feel gratitude. And then you do something odd. You walk into the water, waist deep, then chest. You close your eyes and float. The ocean cradles you like a lullaby.
Historians still argue whether Polynesian navigators truly had a sixth sense. Some call it myth, others call it intuition born of years at sea. Maybe it's both. But here, with your limbs rocking gently on the breath of the tide, you feel it. The rhythm of journeys past, the promise of journeys ahead, the great circle you're part of. You return to shore refreshed, and for the first time in a long while, you feel old. Not in a sad way, in a sacred way. Like a tree that's seen storms and still stands. In the days that follow, children begin to call you elder. You let them. It fits. You teach a little, walk more, sleep deeper. You begin carving a small canoe, not to sail, but to teach. A model. Something the children can place on the water and push, watching how it rides the waves. A miniature future. One night, sitting by a fire, you catch a boy watching the stars. He mutters names. Incorrectly. You gently correct him. He frowns, tries again, this time closer. You smile. The world turns. Generations move. And so, in the hush of twilight, with stars blinking awake and the tide whispering secrets only you understand, you begin to feel the final part of your journey unfolding. Not a new island. Not a final destination. But peace. Because the map still lives, and it always will. As long as someone listens. You lie back on the warm sand, its tiny grains forming to the shape of your spine like a cradle carved by time. The wind breathes low over your face, carrying the salt of ancient tides and the scent of charred driftwood. The stars overhead feel closer now, like friends, not distant gods. You know them by name. You've whispered their stories. You followed them when the sea said nothing, and they've never led you astray. Somewhere far away, a sail stretches. Somewhere else, a chant begins. And here, in this moment, everything is still. Your journey was never about conquest or escape. It was about memory. About carrying the invisible threads of ancestors across thousands of miles so that they might be stitched into the shores of tomorrow. And now, their echoes rest gently in the breath between the waves. Not gone, just waiting, just drifting. The fire beside you crackles low, the sand beneath your fingers cools as night deepens. The ocean continues its quiet rhythm, as if singing you to sleep. You close your eyes, you let go. The map, the canoe, the journey, they're all safe now, carried forward, alive in others. And you rest. The stars will keep watch. They always have. Good night.